Well, good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to you to Cults Parish Church. A welcome to those who are joining us online. My name, for those who maybe don't know who I am, is Shuna Dix. I'm the minister here at Cults Parish Church, and we're just delighted to welcome you here this afternoon for this time of reflection on Holocaust Memorial Day. This afternoon we will share a series of reflections from people across different faith traditions, and we're going to begin with Eva Clark, a Holocaust survivor, who shares with us her story. This will be followed then by members of Aberdeen Interfaith sharing a series of short reflections on the theme of one day, and we'll also hear some more music from Andrew. But first, Eva.
Holocaust Memorial Day, one day. It is an honour for me to have been invited by the Aberdeen Interfaith Group to speak at this year's Holocaust Memorial Day event. My mother, Anke Bergman, would be proud to know her wartime experiences continue to be remembered in Scotland. The first time I spoke here was in 2003, the week of the first National Scottish Holocaust Memorial Day. Prior to the 2020 lockdown, I used to come to Scotland on a regular basis, and over the years have spoken at about 30 schools in various places, including Edinburgh, Glasgow, Dundee, Crieff, Forfar and Lockerbie, amongst other venues. I've also spoken to hundreds of students prior to their visiting Auschwitz with the Holocaust Educational Trust. In 2012, to mark her 95th birthday, my mother and I were VIPs in Cambridge at the premiere of a ballet, Anke's Story. It was performed in 2014 and 17 at the Edinburgh Fringe to much acclaim. In 2017, the Ross sisters, Judith, Fiona and Valerie, invited me to speak at the Kilmuir and Logie Church, Kildare, Invergordon, and took me on a memorable sightseeing tour of the Black Isle and Culloden. In 1939, my stepfather, Carol Bergman, had escaped from occupied Czechoslovakia, managed to get to the UK, where he joined the RAF as an interpreter for the duration of World War II. He often talked about Orkney, where he had been stationed for a while. In October 1948, my mother and I arrived in Harwich from Czechoslovakia. My mother and stepfather had married in Prague earlier that year. Their departure from Czechoslovakia was provoked by the communists having taken over the government. Although we arrived here legally, we might have been refugees, asylum seekers, or migrants. My biological father, Bernd Nathan, was German, Jewish, and came from Hamburg. He arrived in Prague in 1933, thinking that was far enough to be safe. It wasn't, but if he hadn't have done so, he wouldn't have met my mother, and I would not be speaking to you today. My father had been an architect and interior designer, and my mother was a law student at the Charles University until the Nazis closed the Czech universities. They married on the 15th of May 1940, already under Nazi occupation of Czechoslovakia. In November-December of 1941, my father was sent to Theresienstadt, or Terezín, the ghetto and concentration camp in Czechoslovakia, in one of the first transports from Prague, and Anke was deported shortly thereafter. Unknown to them, they were to spend the next 3 years in Terezín. This was an unusually long period of time, and was due to the fact they were both young, strong, and well able to work. And my mother said, luck had an awful lot to do with it. But at the end of September of 1944, their luck ran out when my father was sent to Auschwitz. And incredibly, my mother actually volunteered to follow him the very next day, as she had no idea where he'd been sent. And being the eternal optimist, she thought they would survive. But tragically, she never, ever saw my father again, and heard from an eyewitness and friend, soon after the end of the war, that my father had been shot dead on a death march near Auschwitz on the 18th of January 1945, and it was liberated by the Russian army on the 27th of January 1945, a week later, and that is why we commemorate Holocaust Memorial Day on the 27th of January. When families first arrived in Terezin, the sexes were segregated, but nevertheless, in 1943, my mother discovered she was pregnant. When I asked her about this as a very curious teenager, she replied in a discreet way by saying that, although it was extremely dangerous, she and my father got together secretly as and when they could, and to hell with the consequences. But those consequences proved to be very serious, as when the Nazis discovered my mother was pregnant, they made my parents sign a document saying that when the baby was born, he or she would have to be handed over to be killed. Except they didn't use the word kill, but the word euthanasia. My mother had never before heard the word and had to go and ask somebody what it meant. In the event, my brother Jiří, that means George, was born in February of 1944. He was not taken away from my parents, but died from pneumonia 2 months later. And his death meant my life and my mother's life. Because had my mother arrived in Auschwitz holding my brother in her arms, she would have been sent straight to the gas chambers. But because she arrived there not holding my brother, and although she was pregnant again, this time with me, nobody knew. She knew, but nobody else did, and it didn't show as it was very early on. So again, she lived to see another day. Anka was sent out of Auschwitz to a slave labor camp and armaments factory in Freiburg near Dresden in Germany. Unknown to her, she was to remain there for the next 6 months, from October of 1944 to the beginning of April of 1945, becoming progressively more and more starved and more obviously pregnant. This was very dangerous for her as, upon discovery, she might well have been sent back to Auschwitz to be killed. But luck was still with her when the factory was evacuated at the beginning of April. About 2,000 prisoners were put on a train, not cattle trucks this time, but coal wagons, open to the skies and filthy. My mother was on this nightmare of a train journey for 17 days, with no food and hardly any water. The train eventually arrived in Mauthausen, a beautiful village in Austria on the banks of the Danube near Linz. My mother always maintained the shock of seeing the name at the station provoked the onset of her labour, and I was born in the most dire of circumstances on a cart between the station and the camp. There are 3 reasons why we survived, and the first is a very chilling one. On the 28th of April 1945, the Nazis had run out of gas for the gas chamber. Well, my birthday is the 29th. So presumably had the train arrived on the 26th or 27th, again, I wouldn't be here today. The second indirect reason was because Hitler committed suicide on the 30th. But the third and best reason why we survived is because on the 5th of May, the American army liberated the camp. My mother reckoned she wouldn't have lasted much longer. Anka weighed 5 stone, or 35 kilograms, and I weighed 3 pounds, 1.5 kilograms. The theme for this year's Holocaust Memorial Day is one day. Well, I hope you might agree that the day of my birth is bound to be my choice of a single day. 3 weeks later, when my mother was strong enough to travel, we were repatriated to Prague. Anka always said that arriving there was the worst aspect of her 3.5 years incarceration in camps because, up to then, she'd never allowed herself to think about what might have happened to all the rest of the family. Eventually, Anka discovered her parents, sisters, nephew, my father, and most of the extended family had been murdered in Auschwitz. My mother always said she just had to get on with life as she was the only person I had. And in fact, she said I gave her a reason for living. Starting a new life together and creating a new family unit was how my parents coped with the tragedy that had befallen both their families. My parents were so grateful to have been given the possibility of starting a new life in the UK. My mother lived very happily in Cardiff for over 60 years before she came to live with us in Cambridge, 3 years before her death in 2013, aged 96. When giving my talks, I always like to stress the reasons for doing so, the most important of which is, in my opinion, to try to counteract racism and prejudice, any form of racism and prejudice. I would like to end by saying that I very much hope to resume my visits to Scotland, perhaps in 2023. My thanks and warmest good wishes to you all for 2022.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. May I pay homage to the Blessed One, the Worthy One, and the Buddha. Once, the Blessed One, the Buddha, was living at Savatthi in Jeta's Grove, the monastery that was offered by Anathapindika millionaire. There he addressed, Atitang nanvamakhaya napatikanke anakatang yatatitam pahinantang appatancha anakatang. Pachupannancha yo dhammang tatha tatha vipatsati asamhi rang asankupang tang vitha manupruhaye acheva kicca matapang pochanya maranang sube nahi no sankarante na mahasene na machuna evam vihari mataping ahorat mathatitang tangve phathe karattoti santo ajikhate muniti. Which means you shouldn't chase after the past or place expectations on the future. What is past is left behind. The future is as yet unreached. Whatever quality is present, you clearly see right there. Right there, not taken in, not unshaken. That's how you develop the heart. Urgently doing what should be done today, for who knows, tomorrow dead. There is no bargaining with immortality and his mighty horde. Whoever lives thus urgently, relentlessly, both day and night, has truly had an auspicious day. So says the peaceful saints. May you all be well and happy. May all beings be happy. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
In preparation for today, I read the introductory brief in the preface to One Day, which Patricia kindly circulated to me. That preface introduced two themes. In broad terms, firstly, you didn't think about yesterday, and tomorrow may not happen. It was only today that you had to cope with, and you got through it as best you could. A quotation from Ibby Connell. And then secondly, the other theme was, in the hope that there may be one day in the future with no genocide, we learn about the past. We empathise with others today, and we take action for a better future. So on that first theme of how does one manage to keep going in such terrible circumstances, I recently read the recommended book, The Choice, whose author, Edith Eger, relates how people survived in the most horrific circumstances. And even though they were severely victimised, they did not necessarily allow themselves to become victims. Amongst other things, she celebrates and advocates positive action, where even small acts can boost the spirit and inspire others to think and do similar things. For example, when her sister Magda, defied the female guard and made the guard lose her temper, going so far as to hit her in the face with a rifle butt. This gave Magda a sense of power in what seemed to be the most powerless of situations. Her action inspired Edith in a way that, to quote a women's rights activist, Millicent Fawcett, courage speaks to courage. Also, generally, Edith looked into the positive, or looked for the positive rather, to draw strength from the most unlikely sources. For example, at least Minghella sent her to the right rather than to the left. A Nazi guard eventually turned a blind eye to the fact that she'd stolen carrots from a nearby field. And a Nazi guard even winked at her after she'd completed a full cartwheel in the middle of the prison compound. She drew positivity from all of those things. Later in life, helping others helped Edith herself put the traumas behind her, not to eradicate memories, but to replace them with positive feelings of making a change for the good of others. She also advocated resolving inner turmoils with a will to evolve rather than revolve, to go back in things eternally, whilst acknowledging and accepting that in some ways life can be terrible, but it must be taken in the round, and forgiveness must be included for one's own sake, as she did forgive the Nazis while standing on Goebbels' balcony. We can never really know how each of us as individuals would cope, especially if one would feel abandoned by one's own God, as Viktor Frankl and Elie Wiesel did at times. But maybe then there's something in this quote from Kipling's poem, If you can force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your turn long after they are gone, and so hold on when there's nothing in you except the will which says to them, hold on. I certainly don't know how I would react in similar circumstances, but I just hope that I would have the strength and courage to follow the examples of great people such as Edith Eger, Primo Levi, Viktor Frankl, Elie Wiesel, Kitty Holt, and Walter Poller, and many others who shall remain forever nameless. On the prevention of further atrocities, the last name I mentioned was the author of a book called Medical Block Buchenwald, the camp where Elie Wiesel was interned, which was really the first proper adult book I read in about 1966 when I was 14. As the editor of a socialist newspaper, Walter Poller was imprisoned by the Nazis as a political prisoner and sent to work in this medical block, where medical torture was undertaken on inmates, often directed directly by Joseph Mengele. 56,000 people were murdered at Buchenwald, many after being experimented on simply like laboratory animals in the most horrific ways. As a young teenager, it shocked the life out of me and left me with an overriding willingness to stand up against injustice and prevent the reoccurrence of atrocities. I'm from Northern Ireland, you may have gathered that. But I didn't have to long to wait to look for atrocities and injustices. As in 1968-69, the Northern Irish Civil Rights Movement came to the fore. And coincidentally, this is the 50th anniversary of the Bloody Sunday Massacre. Now, that civil rights movement was based on the leadership of Martin Luther King in the American civil rights movement. And in time, it became hugely successful and contributed hugely to the what's called the Good Friday Agreement. But that's context. At a Protestant Sunday school, I was taught, not as a mainstream theme, but it was there, that the Jews killed Jesus. But it doesn't register me as a 7 or 8 year old child. By the time I got about 10 years old, I had already absorbed the values of Jesus Christ. Having been brought up in a low-income household, I could easily relate to his teachings and deeds for the poor, the sick, and the underprivileged. I found that immensely attractive. In later years, when I became to regard Jesus as a moral activist, and in my own little way, I morphed into a bit of an activist myself at the time. However, in time, I was put off by the murderous religious conflict, and worse, being expected by some members of my community to join in this murdering. At one time, you could join the UDA and you would get £25 in your pocket and a pistol. and that could seem very attractive to a teenager. Eventually, though, I became agnostic and was fortunate enough to get out of Northern Ireland when I was 19. For many years later, I became a humanist, and I see humanism as an opportunity to strive and extend and defend human rights in pursuance of a peaceful and better world, where equality, justice, and freedom applies to all, regardless of faith or religion, or none of these, nationality, ethnicity, country of origin, skin colour, political affiliation, or sexual orientation. We are simply humans. For all our variety, we still have that in common. Thinking of oneself as an activist can sound a bit intimidating, and for some it may have a negative connotation, but most activism is peaceful and personal. For example, becoming a member of a human rights group, or donating money to such groups, signing petitions, challenging casual misogyny or racism in everyday life, or peacefully demonstrating for a cause. In addition, we now have social media to allow ordinary citizens to communicate freely, and given that most mobile phones have a camera, we can show the world quite quickly what evil is going on in the closed backyards. Practically everyone now has a camera, so wrongdoings can be captured and exposed immediately. And indeed, the very public murder of George Floyd in the United States was recorded on a smartphone, and that footage was key to convicting his killer. Someone who actively cared took that footage, and it could be said that the alternative to caring is indifference. Elsewhere, the Me Too movement and Black Lives Matter have both been hugely successful in mobilising public opinion in recent years. Now, I mentioned Buchenwald, but Elie Wiesel was imprisoned in Buchenwald, and he went on to he moved on from a survivor of Buchenwald to become one of the greatest statesmen of the last century. And in a speech to the UN in 1999, he cautioned against the perils of indifference, saying, "Where I came from, society was composed of three simple categories: the killers, the victims, and the bystanders. We felt abandoned and forgotten, all of us. Indifference is always the friend of the enemy, for it benefits the aggressor." And this principle is illustrated in the saying, which is credited to him mostly, "When they came for me, there was no one left to speak up." There are many examples in the modern Western world when democracy and human rights are both under attack from increasingly authoritarian forces. Some would say in our own country and the United States, which ironically were the very bulwarks and defenders of democracy 70 to 80 years ago. Is the wheel turning full circle? I don't know. It might be. But I would never want to take the chance. There are certainly some ominous signs, and I believe that complacency and indifference are dangerous responses. So I passionately feel we have a duty to defend democracy and human rights in whichever way we can, however small that action might be. But finally, in finishing, I'd like to pay my own personal tribute to one person who was never indifferent, and that was Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who died recently. He was truly a great, courageous, and inspirational man who fought tirelessly to defeat the evils of apartheid. And for me, as an activist, he was a tremendous example to us all, and he epitomises that saying, "Courage speaks to courage." Thank you.
Hi, my name's Jackie Ware. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I just wanted to share a little bit about some thoughts that I had and to finish with a poem that I found. I'm going to put some glasses on because I'm of a certain age that I can see yous all perfectly, but I put my glasses on and I can't, so there we go. As a teenager going to school, I don't know about you, but Monday to Friday was a very long time. Now that I'm in my late 50s, I'm very aware of my mortality, and my time here on the earth is running out. I have lived through half a century, and that time has passed quickly. Sometimes we think of the past as a thing quite apart from the present. It is good to remind ourselves that things that matter most must never be at the mercy of things which matter least. We don't need more time. We have all the time there is. No one has more of it than each of us has. We take one day at a time and we use it the best way we know how, because we don't know when it will be our last. I was reminded today, when I visited with my sister, that a poor lady just up in Maastricht, out walking yesterday, was killed very suddenly by a tree falling on top of her. And when I thought about that when I was driving home, I thought this poor lady had just gone out and was expecting to go home to have her supper, and suddenly it was over. So how will you choose to use your time allotment today? Do you want to change the shape of your life? Then we have to change the shape of your day. Do you want to change your day? Change this hour? Change what you think and feel and do at this very moment? You know, a small rudder can steer a very large ship. Small bricks become a magnificent mansion, and small seeds can become beautiful flowers. Time is given to us in a little compartment that is called days. When I was given this subject, the theme, one day at a time, maybe this happened to you as well, and maybe if you're of a certain age, you would think this, but I couldn't get out of my head the song, "One Day at a Time, Sweet Jesus." That's all I'm asking of you. Just give me the strength to do everything what I have to do. Yesterday's gone, sweet Jesus, and tomorrow may never be mine. Lord, help me today. Show me the way, one day at a time. And the poem that I found that I just wanted to share with you, it says, "One day at a time I struggle with all I need to do. There is not enough hours to accomplish every deed or chore, it's true. I try my very best, I'm sure. God always sees, giving me strength to move forward, and as he gave the mighty oak tree. One day at a time, I'm a survivor, no matter what lies ahead. I wake and thank the Lord the bills are paid and my belly is fed. Sometimes I get discouraged, but I think that's true for us all. I'm thankful for his grace that picks me up when I fall. One day at a time is all I have. Tomorrow I cannot claim. Give me strength to make it through. I pray in Jesus' name." Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Suki from Aberdeen, Gurdwara, and I'm representing the Sikh faith. Dear congregation, I would like to share a brief reflection on our chosen theme of one day at a time. I would first like to focus on the first word of that, which is one. This word, number, plays the utmost importance in the Sikh faith, such that our holy scriptures, the Guru Granth Sahib, actually starts with the number one, Ik Oankar. There is only one. We are all one. There is no other. And if humanity could just grasp this one thing, then the world would be a very different place. So I'd like to highlight the importance of remembering our one Creator, the Lord, God, Allah, or Waheguru, as we refer to in the Sikh faith. However, not only one day at a time, but every day. In our faith we call it Nitnem, or daily remembrance. In the Sikh faith and many other faiths, and those of none, daily prayer, meditation and remembrance is such a grounding force, often in hectic daily routines. To remember and feel that we are all, that after all we are universally connected and have at some point come from the one universal force and energy that has created everything and anything we see around us and in the galaxies and beyond. Yet somehow humanity has deviated from knowing our primal bonds of connection with each other and with God. And historically, and even today, some have followed the path of division based on perceived superiority of one over another, one gender over another, one colour over another, one society over another, one religion over another. They have used the meaning of one in totally the wrong, egotistical way. This, as we know, has led to devastating consequences of which you don't need too much reminding of, and it's why we're here today. But there is hope. We must not always be quick to look for and point out differences in one another, which leads to division. It is our collective responsibility to lead by example and encourage all to spread the message of unity, equality, and love for all. When we feel that connection of unity with everyone and everything around us, people, nature, then division starts to disappear and conflict is tamed. But it all starts with us. We all must remember and practice this unity ourselves, not only one day at a time, but every day. And then we look forward to that one day when the oneness will prevail. Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Patricia Finlay, Chairperson of Aberdeen Interfaith and a member of the Church of Scotland. And I had to decide which thing I would read to you. That's why I had one bit of paper down there for later and this one for now. When we have Holocaust Memorial Day, we also remember the other genocides that have happened since, and even those that are happening today. And that's why we have 4 other flags on the communion table there. So I'm going to read a little bit from Hassan, a survivor of the Bosnian genocide, connected to the charity Remembering Srebrenica, if you want to Google it later. Hassan says, I first started properly talking about my experience through the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust in 2010, and I'm now also working with Remembering Srebrenica. It wasn't easy to speak out in the beginning, as emotions were always taking over. If it wasn't for these 2 organisations, would I be talking about it at all? Probably not. For me, it's important to talk about what has happened in Bosnia because of what happened, how it happened, and the fact that much of it is still happening. In Bosnia, war criminals are celebrated as heroes by certain Bosnian politicians. I would like to think people praising Hitler would not be treated so kindly. Bosnia is still divided, and many are working to ensure division stays in place. Not long ago, we had children protesting in Bosnia because adults wanted to build them a school with separate entrances by religion. Then we act surprised when we hear acts of hate. It's our fault. We're not talking enough about hate. Many think if you ignore it, it will go away. It won't. Hate is a virus. If you don't treat it, it will spread. The past is there to show us. Let's learn from it. I often ask myself, how am I a survivor? It's difficult to answer, as I always compare myself to those who have lost family. I was lucky, and am lucky. However, I guess I am a survivor. I want my daughters to be proud of what their father did, however small, to help educate people of the consequences of hate, ignorance, and inaction. No one should go through what I did. It hurts me seeing those things repeat again and again. When will the world say no more and mean it? Hopefully, one day soon. Now we're going to have a little musical interlude, and maybe you might like to write something on the number 1 that's near you or beside you. And if you haven't got one, Jackie can give you one. Just a thought or something that's stuck in your mind of what you've heard, and we will hang them on the tree at the end. We're going to have some more music from Graham, and then we're going to hear a song that was just written specially for this year's Holocaust Memorial Day and performed first for Edinburgh Interfaith Scottish National Holocaust Memorial on Wednesday evening. And then we'll think about the theme, One Day in the Future, for the second half. I have the pleasure to introduce our other guest speaker, who will be online recorded just in case it went wrong. But at the end, we can speak to him. He will be there on Zoom with us. So if you'd like to ask him a question or say something, you'll be able to do that. Just one day in 2015, I went to Aberdeen University to hear a story, lots of stories, by this gentleman called Carl Wilkins. And Carl Wilkins has left an impact on my life and on the life of two of my students who went with me to hear him, 6-year students who said they'd never been to such a moving event in their whole school career. And they were two 6th-year girls who didn't study RMPS or philosophy with me, but who were really moved by the stories Carl told. In 2011, he wrote a book about his experiences called I'm Not Leaving. And he said, while these stories happened during the genocide, the book and documentary are not really about genocide. They're more about the choices people made, the actions people took, the courage people showed, and sacrifices people gave in the face of genocide. In 2008, just while Darfur genocide was still going on, he and his wife were moved to start an organisation that you can read about called The World Outside My Shoes. And going back further to 1994, at the time of the genocide in Rwanda, he was the only American left there and chose to stay, leaving his family, sending his family away, but staying himself. And his co-worker Thomas Kayumba said, all the foreigners left, but not Wilkins. He was still young, to take leave of his little children and his wife, and to give himself to the Rwandan people. I don't know how to explain it. So thank you, Carl, for joining us now.
Thanks so much for the invitation to remember the Holocaust together. I'm Carl Wilkins, and I was living and working in Rwanda when the genocide against the Tutsi was launched. You know, when I get opportunities to talk with students about this horrific catastrophe, they often ask me, what was the hardest part, you know? And I get that. And by far, the hardest part was the senseless slaughter of people, the preventable slaughter of people, more than 1 million people out of the 7 million, and this feeling like can't do anything about it. But we felt like we could do something for the people right in our home, for the people in our community. But that idea that it's preventable, and that was preventable, it's just kind of it's driven me in many ways all of these years. You see, the thinking of genocide, the thinking that says my world would be better without you in it, is something that unfortunately I sometimes have that way of thinking. I don't want to kill anybody, I just often don't want to deal with somebody, and I think, we can make it better by somehow getting away from, eliminating. And whether that's in the family or in our community or in our government, we pay horrible prices with that kind of thinking. And you know, that kind of thinking doesn't come from nowhere. It really is rooted in a blame mentality, a mindset of always trying to figure out, you know, who's to blame here, whose fault is it, that type of thing. And with that mindset, it's really common to see this one thing thinking. We narrow down just to one thing, and we don't see the bigger picture. I really love this quote from Brian Stevenson, the founder of the Equal Justice Initiative, great film, Just Mercy, if you get an opportunity to see that. But his statement, he works with prisoners on death row, wrongly accused, and he says we're more than the worst thing we've done. And I think that's foundational to combat one thing thinking, and also to head us in the direction of not blame, but understanding the harm. When we see something wrong and unjust, it's natural to become angry, but not to dwell in that anger, but to begin to go deeper and ask the deeper questions. I really appreciate Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey's book, What Happened to You? as opposed to the normal question we ask, what's wrong with you? You know, is what we often say to people, which again leads us down that pathway of blame. But this idea of what happened to you really can begin to set us free from the one thing thinking, and it leads us into empathy. It directs us towards empathy, which gives me hope, a lot of hope. My favorite, all-time favorite tool, however, in combating one thing thinking and blame thinking is this idea of finding the good. You know, we're so much more than the thing that we disagree on. And I'm convinced that our ability to prevent genocide and Holocaust is directly linked to our ability to find the good in the other. I want to just end with a story here. Since 2009, been taking doing learning trips to Rwanda. And the last one, because of COVID, was actually 2019. And we're here at a community center about an hour outside of the capital, Kigali. And we're meeting together with men and women who have experienced the genocide, some as perpetrators, some as survivors, some as bystanders. You'd never know it when you see the smiles on their faces. You see the level of joy and engagement with one another, actually at times that you don't know who's who, what their past history was during the genocide. And this particular day, as we were listening to the stories of healing and of reconciliation, we had a couple that had just temporarily joined our group. Well, I mean, we were all together. They didn't join our group, but we all visited this center together. They had just gotten off the plane from the UK, and they operate a nonprofit. I think it's called Big Lunch or something there in the UK. And they were coming to share ideas with Rwanda, to learn from Rwanda. So you imagine, you know, long flight to Rwanda, get off the plane, hop in a vehicle, and within a couple hours, you're sitting here with these people who experienced the genocide, trying to take it all in. And, you know, I think all of us, I was there with a group of teachers, all of us, as we listen to the stories, we have quite a bit of skepticism, perhaps even cynicism, as we're listening to these stories, because it just seems like certain things are unforgivable. I mean, you would totally get it if somebody engages in one thing thinking when the one thing they know about this person is they killed my family. You know, in fact, I don't even want to talk about combating one thing thinking or even talk about blame with somebody who has suffered so much until they show an interest. And usually that's only after they've had boatloads of empathy, lots and lots of empathy and understanding. Then we can go a little deeper if they're interested. But as we're all sitting listening to this story, and then afterwards we're talking about it among ourselves and just really blown away, the lady from the UK said, you know, I noticed something that was the most convincing of anything that happened here today. More convincing than it seemed, the words and the stories, because we have a way of discounting words and stories. She says, I saw a lady reach over to the man next to her. This isn't the couple, there's just some of the people in the room, okay? His collar was turned up, and she reached over and fixed his collar, just kind of naturally. Reached over in the middle of conversation, fixed his collar, went back. Later on, they found out that that lady was a survivor, and the collar of the man she fixed was a perpetrator who'd been released from prison. And I totally got it when this lady says, you don't just reach over and fix the collar of somebody who killed your family unless something serious has happened inside, unless real change has happened inside, unless, I would go on to say, unless you've gotten free from anger and bitterness. You know, it's crazy how sometimes we think that hanging on to anger and bitterness is a way to honor the people who were killed. And again, I'm not going to judge anybody who's angry and bitter because I haven't been there in their shoes. It's horrific things that people have passed through. But I really liked the thought of the kind of absent-mindedly fixing the shirt collar, representing a change that has happened deeper. A change that, you know, we can all be part of doing. This idea is not a massive change. Well, it's big, but it's clear what we can do. To go from genocide stems from thinking, to trust stems from thinking, this is my world would be better with you in it. The only way we can do that, especially with people who have done us harm. And you know, the phrase is there, never again, and I think we've stopped genocides before, so it's I don't agree with, you know, I don't agree with the idea that never again is meaningless. I think we have done some things, it's just hard to know when you have stopped it. But I think even more important on the day-to-day level, which eventually will open it up to the global level, is how we perceive one another. And this idea of our ability to find the good being directly connected with our ability to prevent the largest atrocity, the genocides and the Holocaust that are there. I just really want to thank you for the invitation. Wish I could be there with you face to face, and one day I hope I can. But thanks again for invitation to remember the Holocaust together with you. I really appreciate you taking the time here to listen to a few stories and a few thoughts. All the best.
That was Carl Wilkins of The World Outside Our Shoes. And as Mr. Regmi isn't here, I'm going to read a poem about Darfur, which has a little bit of that hope of one day in the future. It's called Tears of Darfur. O tired land, O depressed sky of Darfur, O plain of no breath, you are bleeding from all corners of your dreams. The bosom of your land weeps the bitterness of blood. O tearful Darfur, can your hungry hands one day cultivate those dry, sad roots left from the countless bones of your children? Can your simple dreams of having a loaf of bread and a roof above come through? Maybe. Maybe one day those broken wings will heal with the caressing hands of peace. We, the people of the world, with our tearful eyes, waiting on the day that acacias will bloom on the lands where the dream of innocence pours on these hopeless days. Now we'll have Nigel, please.
My name's Nigel Dower, and I'm a Quaker. I'm going to offer a short reflection broadly from that perspective. One day in the future invites us to think of a future world in which there will be no war, nor hatred, rejection, or persecution of the other because they are different, such as of being of different colour, of having different languages, different customs, different faiths or beliefs. And there would be no occasion or motivation for the oppression of other groups, let alone genocides or a Holocaust. For me, as a Quaker, one thing that can bring this about is the recognition is that we should answer that of God in everyone. All humans have this divine element within them, maybe buried somewhat in some. Or as the ancient Stoic Epictetus once said, we all have a fragment of divinity within us. And recognition of this leads to fundamental equality of respect, acceptance, and treatment. It also, to my mind, includes responding in the spirit of acceptance to the spiritual journeys and experiments in living of other people, whatever their backgrounds and identities, so long as they do not manifestly or clearly harm others. I was once described many years ago as a factual pessimist and a moral optimist, which I hope I still am. A description that fits many of us who accept that so much in the world is bad, indeed very bad, but also believe in ideals which one day in the world may be realized, and are committed to making an effort to do our bit, small or big, to this end. Quakers sometimes talk of living the kingdom now, living the values now which we would like to see in a future ideal kingdom of God on earth. This is the way, or at least one way, we can, by practice, example, and precept, bring forward that one day in the future, so that sooner rather than later, one day in the future will become one day in the present. As George Fox, the 17th century leader of the Quaker movement, once said, "Walk cheerfully over the earth, answering that of God in everyone." Let us do that.
Audrey.
Hello everybody, I'm Audrey Mallard, I'm a member of the Baha'i Faith, and our vision of the future is that it's going to be immeasurably glorious, but it depends on every one of us living our lives according to the will of God, and that all wars cease, we love each other, we love the people that we don't know, because every human being is of God, a creature of God. And if we build a better world, we have all sorts of problems to address. We have to get rid of armaments. We have to get rid of greed. There is enough in the world for everyone's need, but there isn't enough for everyone's greed. And this is where the tremendous imbalance in society arises, because people are greedy. They want more and more and more. And what do they want it for? Can't take it with you. The only thing you can take with you is the spiritual progress you've made in this life. The rest is dross. And if the future is going to be worth living, then we have to address it now. We can't just let things drift, because we are creating the sort of situation where the planet will go on, but the planet will be unable to sustain our way of life. And we will go extinct, as other civilizations have done. We are heading that way, unless we change the way we live. And it's as simple as that. But as I say, the future can be glorious if we change the way we live and what we expect from life. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
I'd like to thank everybody who's contributed this afternoon, and I would like just to read some words which are like a pledge, and I'm going to try and remember to change the I to we, so that as if you were saying it along with me. This was a last-minute thought, so it's not on the screen. As part of our commitment to ending the language of hatred, we will remember those whose lives have been destroyed through hatred and exclusion in the Holocaust, under Nazi persecution, and in subsequent genocides in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, and Darfur, and other places in the world before and since. We will challenge the language of hatred when we hear it and never use it ourselves. We will carefully consider how we use our voices and will tell others how we feel in a way that does not harm or offend, whether we are speaking, online, or in writing. We will give voice to the voiceless and use our words to draw attention to the experience of others. Work with our friends, family, and colleagues and our community to create a society which is free from the dangers of persecution and hatred. And now Graham will play us another piece of music where if you want another number one, just indicate to Jackie. And then you can hang your number ones on the tree and we'll get Carl hopefully online to speak to us live if you'd like to stay. Feel free to leave after you've hung up your number one if it's long enough for you to stay. But feel free to come forward and we'll have a microphone for you to make a comment or ask a question to Carl.